Maximus, Maximus in Latin means great. Okay, so last week was Parsha Truma, to take up a collection, and then it goes through all of the various implements, the tent, the ark, the enclosure for the tabernacle, the Mishkan. And then Tetzaveh continues with this discussion, and it talks about the lamps that are to be lit, the menorah, and all of the various people are asked to contribute to the making of the various aspects of the tabernacle, and then the clothing of the priest, the high priest. When we read about this, in today's world, it's very clear that in the Jewish world, for the most part, this has no current meaning. But in the church, many of the garments in the church originally had some basis on some of the priestly garments that we read about in the Torah portion. One of the interesting elements of it is that the Torah forbids the mixing of wool and linen in the same clothing. We're not allowed to mix the two, but the garments of the priests intentionally had a mixture of those two elements, of the wool and linen garments. And so various attempts to explain why they had that while everybody else was forbidden to have it, but it was a special quality of it and set them apart. And indeed, in the discussions in the Talmud, which I've actually been doing the last few weeks because the Talmud's been talking about the temple service during the time of Passover, the priests must be wearing the priestly garments in order to perform their functions in the temple. They were not considered, as it were, to be a priest unless they were properly dressed for the performance of that service. And of course, remember, tomorrow is the day before Purim. So that means it is the minor fast day of Ta'anit Esther, the fast of Esther. And then the Megillah reading tomorrow night and on Friday, and all the festivities, the 4 mitzvot of Purim that we talked about, reading Megillah, the gifts to the poor, gifts to your friends, and the Purim Su'udah, which is this year eaten basically as a lunch rather than dinner because running into Shabbat. Okay. All right, so we will turn now to the Hebrew. Share screen. Okay, we are now working on the letter Kaf. The letter Kaf is like a C, right? And it has a dot in it, like a backward C. And when it has the dot, as in Hanukkah, it is pronounced as K. We'll see, and without the dot, then it becomes a Ch. Not like the hat, but the Ch further up in the throat. Actually, it's in the back of your throat, not down in your larynx this way. The hat's supposed to be really far down. Most of us don't pronounce it that way. So the dot is what makes it an air stop. We've mentioned that before numerous times, that if you try to say the letter K, but you don't close make a glottal stop, I guess is what they call it, and you let the air go through instead of K, hence the sound without a dot and a K sound with the dot. Okay, so I'll ask everybody to unmute yourselves. Okay, and we will begin. Line number 1, we have Ka,
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 ke,
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 k,
Ka,
ku,
Ku,
ko,
Ko,
kai.
Kai,
Kai,
Okay, line 2, we've got kor,
Kor,
kain,
Kain,
cod,
Cod,
Ad,
not the fish though, ko,
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 kav,
Ka,
kach,
Ka,
and kikar.
Ka,
Kikar. Line 3,
Kar,
bakar,
Bakar,
bahar,
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 behar,
Behar,
bator,
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 bator. Okay, line 4, batur,
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 Bator,
Batur,
kelev.
Bel,
Belef,
For those who are interested, that's a dog, male. Hakala,
Akala,
kala, kala is the bride. Hakala is the bride.
Kala,
Atzuv
Atsuv,
and vered.
Vered,
Vered. Accent shifts one syllable forward because of the two segals. Vered.
Vered,
Vered. That's it. Shiva,
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 Shiva.
Shiva,
That actually means 7. Ma'arav,
Marav,
Rav,
Geneva.
Geneva,
Geneva. Accent on the last syllable.
Neva,
Geneva,
Theft. Line 6. Kaved,
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 Ivrei,
Ivri,
Ray,
Havana,
Havana,
Kivun.
Kivun,
Right, so how do I know that's the letter is being pronounced as a V? There's no other vowel with it, right? Mitkavein,
Mitkavein,
Kaved,
Mitkavein,
and Kadur.
Kadur,
It's a ball. Kavash,
Kavash,
Lehit Konain.
Lehit Konein,
A lot of syllables there. All right, let's try it again. Lehit Konain.
Lehit Konein,
Koach,
Koach,
Koev,
Koef,
Kochav.
Koach,
All right. Now, we talked about these words before. This is the blessing for the Hanukkah candles. So we'll look at all right, so we're going to go through this real quickly. Atam means what?
You.
Melech is
King,
King.
ruler,
ruler, king, sovereign, whatever, which version you want to use. B'mitzvotav,
Commanded us.
through his mitzvot, or through his commandments. Ner,
Candle.
candle, a lamp. Baruch,
Blessed.
bless. Asher,
Through, I think.
no, who or that. Say Baruch atah Asher Kiddushanu, who commanded us, that commanded us. Who, it's Asher. It's really that he, but it's he uses when we say a blessing. Asher Kiddushanu, who commanded us. Hanukkah,
Well,
Hanukkah.
yeah, Hanukkah. And what is this?
Adonai.
Adonai. We usually, if you want to translate, we usually translate it as Lord. Kid Shanu,
Sanctified.
Made us holy.
made us holy. Lahad Leek,
Lamp or light, candle
a
light.
light to kindle. Shell of Eloheinu.
Lord.
Our Lord.
Well, we usually translate Eloheinu as our God. Or Eloah, which we don't really see very often, is just a generic God, and could be used for pagan gods as well. So Eloheinu is our God. It's a compound. It's the word Eloah, God, and Shalanu, ours. In Hebrew, we can make, well, biblical Hebrew, we make a possessive by using the cutting off part of the Shalanu and just putting the new part on the end of the noun. Modern Hebrew has gotten away from that. Ha'olam.
By commandments, right?
No,
Oh, no, of the world.
the
Of the
world.
world.
Right, the world. It's interesting. It's got a number of different meanings. It can be for the eternity too. Olam is distant thing. Usually translated as the world. Vitzivanu,
By your commandment.
and commanded us. Okay. Let's go to the next page. We'll have a review with all what we've learned so far. Okay, everybody got their ready? Okay, line number 1. Mechaye, Hakol,
Hakol,
Rav,
Rav,
Lahoshia,
Lehoshia,
Mechalkel,
Mechalkel,
Berachamim,
Berachamim,
Nophalim,
Noflim,
Umkayem,
Umkayem,
Emunato.
Emunatov.
By the way, these are all words from the prayer book, from the Siddur. Lishene,
Lishe,
Afar,
Afar,
Kamocha,
Kamocha,
Umatz Miach.
Umatzmiach.
And the last one is Lehahayot.
Lechachayot.
Okay. Line 4. Chanukah.
Hanukkah.
Right. When we're reading the Hebrew, you pronounce it the way it's supposed to be pronounced in Hebrew, not Hanukkah, which is what you might say in English, but Chanukah. Okay.
Hanukkah.
Whoops. Let's try that again. Kupa, Chupatam,
Chupatam.
Tanuach,
Tanuach.
Sheirutz, Shituf.
Shituf.
Line 5. Chumash.
Chumash.
Anybody know what Chumash means?
The printed Bible.
Yeah, we usually refer the Torah is usually referred to as a Chumash. And, you know, it's actually short. It's Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5/5 of the Torah. So we call it colloquially a Chumash.
Is that referred to only the 5 books of Moses or the entire Tanakh?
Well, usually it's referring just to the 5 books of Moses. You know, if you go to shul, go to a synagogue, they usually have chumashim for people to follow the Torah reading. So they'll have the Torah reading in it, and we usually have the Haftorah reading in it as well. And some chumashim might have Megillot Esther, the Megillot in it as well. Okay, the second word on line 5, Ratuv.
Ratuf.
Hu'al. Chelek.
Wow. Chelek.
What was the wow about? Okay. And Chufsha.
Chufsha.
All right, line number 6. Whoops. Chukat.
Chukat.
Kaluach.
Kaluach.
Kalif.
Kalif.
Achshav.
Achshav.
Kimat.
Kimat.
Chayfetz.
Chayfetz.
Hafuch.
Hafuch.
Kochavim.
Kochavim.
B'malchutcha.
B'malchutcha.
All right, so let's break it down. We have B, all right, in your kingdom, in your realm, in your kingdom. Yim loch.
Yimloch.
Sion.
Sion.
That's Zion in English. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Okay. And in English, it's hallelujah. Ahava.
Ahava.
Ahavtanu.
Ahavtanu.
So again, to show you how Hebrew differ from English, Haftanu is past tense you loved, and nu at the end means us. Using one word, in English we have to say, you have loved us. But in Hebrew, we say it in one word, in biblical Hebrew. Okay. 9, Chamalta.
Chamalta.
Chelkenu. Betoratecha. Harachaman. Shutafut. Line 10. Kotel. Anybody know what kotel means?
The Western Wall.
No, it means a wall. Okay.
Oh.
See,
Is it the wall, the Wailing Wall?
yeah, well, what happens is the word is actually, the word kotel means a wall. Kotel Ma'aravi, or Kotel Hamaravi, the Western Wall, which is sometimes called the Wailing Wall, all right, will also be references if you say the wall, just like you said, the White House. Normally, if we said the White House, we weren't talking about a house on my street that's colored as white. We're talking about the one in Washington. So if people are talking about going to the Kotel, they're talking about the Kotel Maravi, the Wailing Wall. You'll also hear people calling it the Kosel, because in Ashkenazic pronunciation, it's a S sound, okay? Or the Koisel, especially if you get nice Eastern European accent. Going to the Koisel, see at the Koisel. All right.
I really don't like that.
You don't like that? Which part, the Koisel?
No, yes, the Eastern European, because then they say Torah instead of Torah, and it sounds off.
You know, if I switch back to my old Southern accent I used to have, that sounds off too. But but the difference is in Ashkenazic pronunciations, you make more distinctions between vowels than we do in the Sephardic pronunciation. And you make a distinction between the tav with and without a dot. It's not a right or wrong. It's just, it's a dialect. Is Mandarin and Cantonese, right? And about okay. Third word is Cashier.
Cashier.
Kishuf.
Kishuf.
Don't me catch you doing any kishuf, any witchery. And Kahor.
Kahol.
Israel's colors are Kahol v'Lavan, the blue and white. Okay. The last one we're going to do today is the letter Sin, as in Sarah. The difference is when it's on the left, when the dot is on the top left of the letter, it's pronounced as an S. And one cute way of remembering that is in Latin, left is the word for sinister. Sinistra is left, sinister. So it's on the left, on the S, the sinister side is pronounced S. If it's on the right side, then it's pronounced sh. Okay, because we're working on the word she'asa as part of the blessing, the second blessing for Hanukkah. Okay, so line number 1, we have see,
See.
say,
Say.
se,
Se.
sa,
Sa.
sai,
Sai.
su,
Su.
s,
Su.
su,
Su.
and so.
So.
Okay, line number 2. Shar, oh, sar, excuse me. Sar.
Sar.
Sam,
Sam.
Sam,
Sham.
Sham. I'm teaching you the mistake. Okay, Sham.
I thought you did it on purpose.
No, you find that in the Talmud every once in a while. The rabbi says something in the Talmud. I was just checking the students out. It's the truth. We find that in the Talmud a few places. I don't know if that's really, they're being honest there or not. Anyway, the fourth one is Shas. Satan.
Satan.
Anybody know what Satan means?
Satan.
What?
Adversary.
Satan.
Adversary, and it becomes Satan in English, exactly. And Sarai.
Sarai.
Sarah was originally named Sarai, and her name was changed to Sarah. Line 3. Shoneh. How do I know it's Shoneh? Well, you have a dot on the right side. That tells me it's got to be the shin. If it's at the beginning of the word and you got 2 dots on it, you know the second one's going to be the O. All right, but this would be snap. Okay? Snap. Sameach.
Sameach.
Samecha.
Samecha.
Simcha.
Simcha.
All that comes from the word sameach. These 3 letters, sin mem chet, means joy. Joy, joyful, smecha, be happy, simcha, a joyful event. Line number 4. Sarah.
Sarah.
Shchenut.
Shchenut.
Maskoret.
Maskoret.
Shadchan.
Shadchan.
Hiskir. Hiskir. Okay. 5. Shava. I don't like this one. Soveh. Now, why it's got to be serving both purposes, as the dot for the sin and the dot for the O, because otherwise there's no vowel associated with it. Here, I knew the word is supposed to be snap. It could be sonat too. I just assumed they were using it as snap, but without the shvav. Normally, if it was going to be a sin without the O vowel, it would have 2 dots under it. If it's got the O vowel, if it doesn't have 2 dots under it, then that little dot is serving both purposes, or another vowel. If it doesn't have another vowel underneath it, it's got to be the O. So I really led you astray there too. I'm really doing well tonight. Okay. All right. So that line 5. The next one is shituf.
Shituf.
Sha'on.
Sha'on.
Sadeh.
Sadeh.
K'asu.
K'asu.
Echalit.
Echalit.
She'asa.
She'asa.
La'avotechem.
La'avotechem.
Right? And when I'm talking about how words are made, la means 2. Avot is other fathers or ancestors. Chem, yours, to your ancestors. Okay. And the last one is sorek.
Sorek. Sorek. No,
sorek. Sorek.
Sorek.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Stop sharing. Okay, folks. This week and next week, we're going to be talking about Pesach. Actually, the tradition is 30 days before the holiday, you're supposed to start reviewing the laws. So this is almost perfect because Purim is the 14th of Adar, and Pesach begins the night of the 15th of Nisan. So we're going to have to understand a term. No, not March 5th. Let's see. Next week, March 3rd, we have a class. My mistake, Adi. I think I mentioned it last week. No, next week will be a class. And then the following week, I guess it's March the 10th, we will have the exam. Okay. I give you a lot of good stuff at the very end to test you on for that test. Now, the Bible, the Torah says that on Pesach, we're not allowed to have any chametz. Lo yimatzeh moshrotechem. You can't find in any of your settlements chametz. Now we have to define it. If I asked you what you can't eat on Pesach, what would you come up with? Any guesses?
Unleavened bread.
Ah, you did it right. Unleavened bread. Very good, Mark. You're on the ball. Because is matzah bread? If I eat a piece of matzah, if I want to eat a pizza matzah, what's the proper blessing? Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, blessing for bread. The definition of bread is basically flour and water that have been mixed together and cooked, baked. That's bread. All right? When you start adding things at a certain point, it turns from bread to cake. But that's the blessing for bread. So what is forbidden on Pesach, the consumption of, excuse me, the consumption of what we call in Hebrew chametz. What is the definition of chametz? And that's what we have to understand. The rabbis understood it this way. There are 5 basic grains that the ancient world was familiar with, as we understand from our sources: wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye. Those were the 5 basic grains that were used in the ancient Middle East. Sometimes rice was available, but these 5, wheat, barley, oats, spelt, rye, those are all the grains that the rabbi said you can make bread from. And that's in part because those are all those breads have gluten. All those grains have gluten. And it's the gluten that holds it together when it starts to rise. The only exception to that might be oats. All right? That's why I have to eat oat matzah on Pesach, because I can't have gluten. All right. So now, first of all, in order to be chametz, it must be made from flour of these 5 grains: wheat, barley, oats, spelt, rye. If it made from anything else, it's not chametz. We'll talk about whether or not you can eat it on Passover, but it's not chametz. And what makes it not chametz is once you have mixed the flour and water together, it is kneaded, mixed and kneaded and baked within 18 minutes. If it goes beyond the 18-minute mark, it is said to begin the process of really digestion, breaking down and creating carbon dioxide in the dough, which is the definition of chametz. All right. The process, what is chametz? What happens with bread, dough? You mix the water, the natural yeast in the air can get into it, and the yeast starts breaking down the sugars in the flour and gives off gas, which is the carbon dioxide, which makes it rise. So the rabbis understood, if you make bread from these grains, and you mix it with water and you bake it before 18 minutes is up, that is the definition of matzah that you can use on Passover. Yeah, just like 18 minutes with the candles. Interestingly enough, I just read this, actually it was yesterday's Talmud discussion, and it's complicated why 18, but it is based upon a discussion of how far a person walks in a day. And the definition of that, simply, it was understood to be that a person could walk about 40 kilometers in a day, which is approximately 40 mil. That's what the measurement that was used in Talmudic times. And then that's used in all kinds of stuff for the numbers for time. 18 minutes for lighting the candles, 18 minutes for chametz to start produce itself, etc. Now, when we make matzah, yes.
So it doesn't have any connection with 18 being the 18th letter, being hey or hi, hey, right? Which is the letter
No. First of all, remember in Hebrew, the letter hey is the 5th letter. That's why it's 5. The letter het is the 8th, and yud is 10. And when you put them together, yud chet, that's 18, or chai. Okay, but no, that has nothing to do with it. Maybe there's some secret thing that somehow was involved. I don't know, but that it doesn't seem to be at least straightforward explanation. You want a nice mystical reason? Yeah, I'm sure the Kabbalists have done something with that. Now, all things being equal, this is what we're talking about. Now, you can speed up the process of turning bread into leaven. You can slow it down. If you use warm water, it will start the process faster. If anybody's done baking, you know that you always want to put warm water with the yeast before you put it in with the flour. So what is done is, at least traditionally, the water is left out overnight so that it is room temperature before it is used to make the matzahs. Now, in years past, we're going to start with years ago, what would happen was the wheat would be harvested. They make sure it didn't get wet at all in the process at any time. It would be ground up into flour. And then when you're ready to bake the matzot, you get an oven that's heated very highly, hot. Many years ago, I was lucky enough to be involved in making some matzot. And it was at a Hasidic shtibel, and the rabbi there had an old pizza oven. And what they did was they lined it with bricks. It was kashered, and it got it as hot as it could be. And they took the lulav from Sukkot, and they threw it into the oven. And if it burst into flames right away, they knew the oven was hot enough. Okay, so that's a real hot oven. So what happens is, especially today, now we've got good ways of measuring it. Somebody sets a timer, 18 minutes, ready, go. So they start the timer. The water is poured into the mixing bowl into the flour. The Rebbe who is doing it, he mixes it all up. And then he takes a handful, hands it to the first person, takes another handful to the second person, another handful. You need lots of people to do this. And then everybody takes their matzah to the tables and they roll it out and make it as flat as they can. And then they take it to the oven. And they either put holes in it beforehand with a fork, or they have the roller that goes on it. They put it into the oven. They take it out of the oven almost right away because it gets baked within a matter of a minute or two. And then the alarm goes off, bing, 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 bing. Stop. If it's not out of the oven, it's no good. If you haven't put it in the oven, it's no good. Clean off the tables, clean off the rolling pins, wipe them nice and clean, clean the bowl out, make sure there's no residue whatsoever, and you start again. And when you go and buy hand matzot, that's what we have today. If you're interested in it, they cost you a fortune. And if they're oat matzahs, they cost you a double fortune, believe me. And a lot of people like to have what they call hand shmura matzah. I'll explain shmura in a minute. At least for the Passover Seders. Some like to have it the entire Passover time. They prefer to have only hand shmura matzah. Now the fact, what is shmura? Really all matzahs are shmura. Shmura means guarded. It's watched to make sure nothing happens to it. The wheat that is used for shmura matzot, they make sure that even before the harvest that it's dry, the rain doesn't sit on it, the water doesn't sit on it before it's been harvested. Of course, that's not really a problem, but that's what it is. And then they make it by hand with lots of people working at it. The fact of the matter is, the machine shmura matzah, which you can also get, which is the same flour, but it's just done on machinery, is probably really more likely to be kosher, 100% kosher than the hand shmura matzah, but that's another story. Okay, so before Pesach, in today's world, we make sure that we have all our matzot ready, that we're going to need for the entire time of Passover for Pesach. It's very clear that our ancestors used to bake matzah on Passover, but we don't do that anymore. We're very, very stringent. The laws of Passover have become more and more strict, clearly, over the passage of time. It says in the Torah that if the penalty for eating chametz on Passover is karet, being cut off. And there are different definitions of what karet means. Excuse me. Some say it means that when you die, your soul is blotted out. You don't get to go to paradise, to heaven. Others understood it to mean that your children die young, or you die young, or all kinds of definite. But it was considered to be the worst penalty possible, worse than the death penalty. But it's all in the hands of heaven. So we're told, therefore, any baked goods that we have on Passover, if they're going to be made from wheat, barley, oats, spelt, or rye, can only be made from matzahs that have been ground up and made into a meal kind of thing to bake with. That's why all these sponge cakes on Passover, on Pesach. Now, the fact of the matter is, there are many other grains or cereals out there in the world. Rice, for example. The Talmud says, and there's an argument in the Talmud as to whether or not you can use rice to make matzot. And the rabbi said, in order to be able to be made into matzot, for it to be used for matzot, it has to be capable of becoming chametz. Okay? And so if it cannot become chametz, if it doesn't ferment in the normal process, as with baking bread or cakes, etc., then it's not kosher to make matzah out of. And the rabbi said that rice does not ferment that way. Instead, they said it just spoils. So rice cannot be used for matzahs. So theoretically, you can use rice on Passover because it's not something that can become chametz. And the fact of the matter is, the Talmud makes very clear that that seems to be the dominant position. However, Ashkenazic Jewry, all right, Mark, who doesn't like the Ashkenazic pronunciation, you're going to have more not to like. Ashkenazic Jewry decided at some point in time, and it's a subject of great debate, and how this came about is unclear. that they would not eat rice on Passover. Not only that, we do not consume on Passover what are broadly called kitniot, various kinds of beans and peas and semi-grains that for whatever reason, the rabbis thought could cause confusion. That's the general accepted statement. So beans, rice, lentils, in Ashkenazic tradition were not used for Passover. And indeed, our Sephardic brethren, for the most part, would use these items. Some did refrain from using rice, for example, but in general, they used rice. And indeed, the only thing is they would make sure they would buy their rice before Passover, and they would have to go through it to make sure there are no kernels of wheat that got mixed in. See, my theory has always been that the problem was if when you went to the market in those days, it's like going to a wholesale warehouse. You got a basket here full of wheat, and then a basket here of barley, and a basket of rice, and a basket of this and that, and whatever. Now, you're supposed to use only the one scoop in each basket that goes with that basket. But if you've ever gone to a place where they have different things like that, you know people cheat. And so maybe it could have had cross-contamination. And you could have gotten wheat mixed in with the rice or whatever. But that is the standard Ashkenazic tradition. You may have heard that a couple of years ago, the conservative movement said that it was okay to use kitniot on Passover. That was a decision made by the law committee of the conservative rabbis. It doesn't mean you have to. It means that they were of the opinion that no longer did you need to follow that restriction. Speak to your rabbi. Most of us who are more traditional still follow that law. But there's the major difference is it's not chametz. So for example, if you got invited, an Ashkenazi Jew got invited to a Sephardi family's home for Passover, we would not be permitted to eat the rice if they served rice, but we could use their food, we'd eat on their dishes. We would not consider it to be chametz. Follow? Now, again, really, it should have been only those grains or items that were found in Europe back in the Middle Ages that were forbidden. For example, a number of years ago, we were talking about, I think it was in the 40s or 50s even, 19. We haven't got to the 2050s yet, have we? Seems like it. All right. One of the great poskim, one of the most important Orthodox decisors of Jewish law, was asked about peanuts. Now, peanuts come from Americas. They didn't have it in Europe, just like they didn't have potatoes in Europe. And he said only those items that were known when this restriction was created would be forbidden for Passover. So he said, really, you could have peanuts on Passover. Well, you will not find an Orthodox home today that has peanuts on Passover because it kind of got overruled. Similarly, soybeans shouldn't really fall under that. Or what do you call it? Its really name was rapeseed, canola. Really, there's no reason we couldn't have canola or even corn oil. However, as I said, the laws of Pesach and the desire to be extra careful to make sure you make no mistakes, that kind of steamroller became part and parcel of the standard Ashkenazic practice. A few years ago, when quinoa started showing up, there were questions asked. Well, quinoa has nothing to do with grains. It's not a grain. It's actually a fruit, technically, if I understand right. So there's no reason you can't use quinoa but you got to make sure that nothing got else added to it. And some want to say, well, you can get mixed. They come up with excuses to say why you shouldn't be able to use quinoa. I'll tell you, even there was a time in Europe way back when that they wanted to say you couldn't use potatoes because potatoes are made into flour. As a matter of fact, if we didn't have potato starch, we'd have no baked goods to speak of on Passover. So again, talk to your rabbi for guidance on what he or she tells you are the obligations that you have in terms of kitniot on Passover. I don't use them. I follow the restriction, but I don't fault somebody who decides they will use it. Part of the rationale, by the way, is that in Israel, you have a situation that is the reversal of what you have in North America. North America, the dominant stream of Orthodox Jewry and Jewry in general comes from Ashkenazic background. Sephardim are a relatively small minority in North America of Jewry. Jews come, from Sephardic backgrounds. So most of the hechshers, most of the supervision that was done by Ashkenazic rabbis, so they didn't permit things that Sephardim would eat. In Israel, it's the reverse. The Sephardic community was the largest ethnic community religiously in Israel. May not be today. I'm not sure how the division, but in terms of religious part of Israel, I think they still are the majority. And so if you were Ashkenazi, of Ashkenazic background, you had a hard time finding a lot of products for Passover because Sephardim didn't care. They had no problems with having kitniot in their foodstuff. And so Ashkenazic Jews are at a disadvantage in Israel. Today, what has happened, we get so many products brought in from Israel that you have to be very careful. If you're going to be stringent on kitniot, you have to always read the ingredients, even if it says kosher for Passover, because some of them will say kosher for Passover for those who eat kitniot. So, like I say, so that's the circumstance that we have today. Nothing wrong with eating kitniot, it's just that's the standard. Now, not only can we, but right now we're going to talk about chametz. If you eat kitniot, then it doesn't matter what I'm going to say. But if you don't eat kitniot, then it does matter. Because if you pick up a can of anything or a box of anything and you look at its ingredients, wheat's all over the place. Even if you don't expect it, you see wheat in it. You will see sometimes says may have been manufactured on machinery that uses for wheat. We'll come back to koshering for Pesach a little bit later. Corn oil, which really shouldn't be a problem, but as I said, explained, is a problem. That's used in a lot of products, or soybean oil, or all kinds of other ingredients. So once a food is manufactured, it's more than just raw food. There are all kinds of things that can be added. The same issue, we have kashrut in general. We have a double fold for Pesach, because sometimes they can be kosher, but they're not kosher for Passover. And so because of the stringency, it became very clear that extra supervision was desired for kosher for Passover products. So prepared foods, butter even, cheese, certainly anything that may have had grain source, anything that may have had any kind of alcohol in it, that could be from grain alcohol, could be a problem. And so the observant community is very careful when buying products for Pesach, only to buy products if they've undergone some kind of production other than just harvesting it, to look for kosher supervision. And if you go, well, in today's crazy world, but if you walk into Sobeys, that's a very big kosher market here in Thornhill, or No Frills on Center Street. I'm not advertising them, I'm just telling you, they clean their shelves off and have a whole section of Passover goods that are all certified kosher for Passover, so that the observant Jewish community who wants to be extra careful can do that. So anything that has been manufactured in some way, produced in some way, traditionally we understand requires a supervision. Now, one of the exceptions to that is milk. If you will, milk, according to most authorities, shouldn't be a problem for Passover. Some were very stringent. And in the old days, when the farmer would milk his cow and he milks it into his bucket, Jewish law was you had to have somebody observe him, make sure he didn't mix other milks in it. That's one thing. Furthermore, you want to make sure he wasn't eating a sandwich and dropping crumbs into his milk while he was milking his cow or his goat, whatever the case may be. Many authorities will say if you buy milk before Passover, before the time that Passover, the ban on eating chametz begins, then you can buy it in advance and have it for Passover. Others purchase kosher for Passover milk, in which case supposedly the cows are not fed chametz for a couple of weeks before Passover, so there shouldn't be any chemical reaction from to their milk. Just this week, I discovered something that makes, I usually thought of as being kind of crazy, but there was an article this weekend about cow's butter, that the cattle were being fed feed that had palm oil in it. And the palm oil in the animal feed affected the butter fat content of their milk, and thus makes butter harder at room temperature. So I may have to start thinking differently about how my attitude towards whether or not a cow has chametz milk or not. I know if he eats chocolate, he doesn't become a chocolate milk cow, but maybe the chametz is something to worry about. I don't know. Okay? But that's what I do. I will buy milk before Passover, although often we get what they call the Cholav Yisrael, the kosher Passover milk. Cheeses, all kinds of cheeses, those things that are manufactured, there are issues that may take place, and therefore they require a hechsher. Vegetables do not, fresh vegetables, frozen vegetables do not require really supervision. Canned vegetables do, because and that's even becomes a question about kashrut in general, because they can be cooked in these great big cookeries. I forget what they call these things, but they're huge ovens, and you have hundreds and hundreds of cans being cooked at the same time, and sometimes different things being cooked at the same time with it. So that could be an issue on canned vegetables. Wine in general is kosher for Passover. You'll see all the wine bottles, they'll say kosher for Passover on them. But if it's just plain grape wine, there shouldn't be no issue with kosher for Passover kosher wine, although it will be marked that way frequently. But alcoholic beverages, if they're made from grain, are not permitted on Passover. Theoretically, I should be able to drink my bourbon, but again, it's made from corn, and corn should be okay. But unfortunately, I accept not eating kitniot, and I accept the ban on corn today, so I'm stuck. But all you Scotch drinkers, barley and wheat, that's your Scotch. If you drink rye, that's rye also. You're out of luck. There are liquor, vodka, Vishniak, other things out there that if one really must have high-grade alcohol in their diet, there are some things out there, most of which I would not recommend. Okay. So similarly, most butcher shops or butchers make special runs for Passover. Again, it shouldn't be a problem because they should not be having anything in their in the butcher shop or near anything that would be chametz stick. Well, if it's a small butcher shop, they may make things, make other products. I know one of the butchers that I go to does that. So they will, generally speaking, they will, the smaller ones close up before Passover for a period of time, just a couple of days to clean out and kosher everything. So what we do is before Passover, we begin the process. We try to cut back on what we buy that might have a problem, because the law, the rabbis understood from what it says in the Torah, lo yira'eh lo yamatzeh. You can neither see it nor find it in your homes on Pesach. So any chametz has to be removed. Bishul, we will talk about that. Yeah, in theory, maybe Bishul applies on Pesach, but I'll talk about, we'll come to that when we come to koshering. So in theory, it used to be, you clean the house out. You had a small house, where you have a few rooms, a couple of rooms. If you've ever looked and gone to Israel, they had three room houses. One room for the people, one room for the animals, and then a kitchen area, which was actually outside. And so you would go and you clean out all the chametz, any leftover flour, any leftover wheat, you get rid of it, sell it, feed it to your animals before Passover, check it out. The night before Passover, you do a bedikat chametz, you search through the house using, originally used to say, use a candle. There's a blessing in most Haggadot at the very beginning of the Haggadah. It has the blessings and the formula that you're supposed to say for removing a chametz from your homes. Then an hour before celestial noon, you can no longer consume chametz until, and you can't eat matzah yet either. So you have the special taste of matzah at the Seder. End of story. Well, life is a little more complicated than it was in those days. People have large stores of food that they purchase during the course of time. And it becomes an issue. It becomes a very big financial issue that may take place. So early on was established a custom that many people do follow, and that is called michirat chametz, selling of your chametz. While I may not own or use chametz on Passover, somebody who's not Jewish has no such restriction. Why should they? The law, there's no reason for a non-Jew, just like a non-Jew can eat pork. There's nothing wrong with that. And if I decided to sell everything I had that was chametz to somebody else and he took it home to eat, good way to get rid of it. But the fact of the matter is, it's not so simple. First of all, I got my bourbon collection. Do I really want to get rid of all of my bourbon? So what happens now is someone call it, and there's basis for the word's slipping from my mind right now. As I get older, start losing it. Legal fiction. All right, but it's not a fiction, but it is and it isn't. Let me explain. What generally takes place today is that as much as you can, you get rid of chametz that you don't need. You eat it up, you don't buy stuff, what have you. If you have a lot of items, including your dishes that you use during the year that may have chametz on them, and that's not really a problem. We sell it to a non-Jew. Now, You can do it yourself, or which most people don't do that, who's their rabbi, their synagogue's rabbi, or somebody else, gets power of attorney, what we call in Hebrew, shtar shah, from you to sell your chametz. You tell the rabbi in this document where it's found, the approximate value of it, and that it's locked away, will be locked away during the next 8 days of Passover. And you take it and you put it in a room or some closet and you shut it up and you don't touch it. Then the morning before Passover, the rabbi, and I've done this years and years ago, I haven't done it for a while. Once I didn't have a pulpit, I did once. I helped out with the rabbi at the shul I go to. He consults with somebody who's not Jewish and says, okay, this is what we're going to do. I have all of these letters, these legal rights to sell the chametz that belongs to the people that are registered for this. They grant me the power of attorney to sell to you. And I'm going to sell it to you. I'm going to give you a document in Hebrew, and I'm going to explain that document to you in total. That document says that we are making an agreement that as of a certain time, as a certain day, any and all chametz that I have the rights to sell to you, I indeed am selling to you. You become the owner of that chametz. You will give me a down payment. To help you out, I'm going to loan you a few dollars. So you loan some money. So first of all, I need a down payment. We'll say the down payment can be $100. Okay. Secondly, I'm going to rent to you in my home, a space where my chametz is. I'm going to give you the legal right to come into my house whenever you want to collect that chametz. In order to enable you to do it, I'm giving you a key to my home. And you are also renting all of the spaces and all the Jewish homes that I've got power of attorney to handle. And you have the right to go to those places and ask for their chametz. You're not going to get a key there, but you can go knock on the door and say, I want my chametz. We're going to shake hands on it. We're going to sign the document. We're going to verbally agree to this. We're going to do traditional Jewish kinyanim. You're going to lift a handkerchief from me or a pen from me as a sign of your taking possession. And even if the civil courts would say that this sale is invalid, you and I agree that we are going to make it into a valid contract, despite what the legal authorities might say. Now you've given me the down payment. You've given me rental money for my home where my chametz is. When Passover ends, you'll come to my office and we will sit down and we will look at the documents and we'll see how much money you owe me for the rest of the chametz. Usually what happens is the night after Passover, the nice Gentile gentleman, maybe the janitor of the synagogue, comes to the rabbi, and rabbi says, "Okay, you wanna get your chametz? Going to have to figure. What, Rabbi? I don't think I really want it. You sure of that? Yeah, I don't have the store. Okay, so I'll give you back your purchase money. After all, you didn't take it, so you get your money back. Forget the loan. Don't worry about paying me back for the loan. It's a gift to you." And the chametz goes back to its owners, original owners. Now, I wanted to explain it because it's a legal fiction, but it is meant to follow the letter of the law. We know at the beginning what's going to happen at the end, but it has to be done in such a way that should he decide he really wants it, he can have it. All right. So and why do we do it that way? Because we want to make it as clear as possible that we are not claiming any ownership to these materials during Passover. So it doesn't belong to us. Just like if I owned an apartment building and I have different people renting apartments in it, what they do in their apartment is their business. If they want to have ham and eggs, they can have ham and eggs. I'm Jewish. I keep code. That doesn't matter. It's their apartment. They rent it. There are a lot. Yeah. If I rent out storehouses, I don't have to worry about, as long as it's legal, what they put in the storehouse. It's their rental property and they're allowed to do it. So it all follows within this construct of legal actions, but it deals with the modern reality that we have to deal with. Okay? So we get rid of the chametz, whatever we can. If you want to sell the chametz that you have left over, preferably it should be something that you can get rid of, dispose of, or put away to be sold. The night before Pesach, we go through the house. We look through the rooms. Most of us today, to be honest with you, it's just a kind of a pro forma search for chametz. It's supposed to be a real search. It's a good reason for cleaning your house. You know, give your house a good spring cleaning. The morning before Passover, before the time that we're not allowed to have eat chametz, we burn it. So usually, I don't know what's going to happen this year or not. With I know it didn't happen last year. I know at the Bayit, maybe some other places, they make arrangements with the fire department. They have this special bin that's out there, and they make a big fire, and people bring their chametz and put it on the fire. Or you can do it in your own backyard and on your barbecue. We recite a formula in the evening, and we recite the formula again in the morning. In the evening, we say a blessing before we do the search. In the morning, there's no blessing. But there is this formula. It's in Aramaic. And if you don't understand the Aramaic, you should say it in English. And basically it says, any chametz that I found or have not found should be null and void and like the dust of the earth to me. So if you happen to miss something, and during the course of a Passover, you come across a loaf of bread that you didn't know about, it's just dust, it's dirt. You throw it out. Okay. It's not yours. You've abandoned ownership of it, and you consider it to be to that nature. And now we're ready for Pesach. But we have to cook for Passover. Now we get to Mark's questions. Mark's question. Just like, you know, we're going to review the laws of kashrut because that's what applies here. Now, obviously, you have to have a kosher kitchen, ideally. Right? We talked about that. Now, since we treat chametz like any other item, we say if I have a pot and I cook my soup in that pot and I throw in my chametz noodles, not me, my wife does for hers, or she makes matzah, I get special matzah balls, they get the other matzah balls, right? That pot now becomes chametz. So I have to, if I'm going to use it for Passover, I have to kasher it, just like I would kasher anything else. So if it's something that's used on the top of the stove that you boil in it, you fill it with water, or you put it into boiling water. You can do that with your cutlery. You can do that with smaller pots. A big pot, you put it on the stove and you fill it with water. When it gets hot, boiling, you have to drop something hot into it so it comes over, makes a big splash, and messes everything up. Okay. Plates, dinnerware, that we do not use the same for Passover. Either we have separate Passover dishes or use paper plates and stuff for Passover and plastic. We use a combination of that. We have our Passover dishes. You know, that's why when we moved a few dozen times, Well, we have our fleishik dishes, we have our milchik dishes, we have our parv dishes in pots and pans, and then we have our Passover dishes in milchik and fleishik, and less of those. But the oven has to be kosher. If you have a self-cleaning oven, no problem. Just clean it. Don't use it for 24 hours. Run the cleaning on it. Now, the issue of bitul, nullification in 60, is a little more complicated. Normally, we say that if something accidentally falls in, let's say milk into your meat soup, well, if it's not 1 part in 60, you have to throw it out because it's you can't use it at all. You have to dispose of it. Now, if it's more than 60 parts to the 1 part milk, you can say it's nullified, it's batel. But that principle applies only to something that will be kosher at that point, in a sense, and not something that will be kosher later on. In other words, that pot of soup is either going to be kosher or not kosher. Okay? If it's nullified, it's okay. If it's not nullified, it's not kosher. The difference is that when it comes to Passover, if I made soup and I accidentally put some chametz into the soup, it's not going to be kosher for Passover, but if I waited till after Passover, it would be kosher. See, it didn't change it from being kosher in general, it just change it from being kosher to Passover. So generally speaking, we say it doesn't work that way. But a nullification in 60. It depends on certain circumstances. Again, you have to ask your rabbi, but that's why we buy products from the store for Passover. The tradition is, even if there might have been an accidental admixture, we would not permit it for Passover even. It's a little more, it really shouldn't be an issue because you're not going to be, if you got chametz in it, you should not have been having any chametz around when you're cooking for Passover. If it's milk and meat, the same rules apply like any other time. Right? So it's just a question of chametz getting mixed into it. Right? And that's really an issue more for people who supervise kitchens and things than it is for you and me in our ordinary day lives, because we're not going to be cooking anything for Passover while we got chametz hanging around. Well, at least we shouldn't be. I mean, my house gets, it's kosher at Passover usually a week before. And we eat either, we eat either stuff that can be kosher for Passover, or we cook it somewhere else and eat it somewhere else in the basement or something. Now, pots and pans can be koshered. Baking utensils, we say they cannot be. We don't use baking utensils that we use for the year to bake on Pesach. That we have to have separate baking utensils for that. All right. Now, the first Seder, as I said, the tradition is that we do not eat matzah prior to Pesach. There are different traditions. I follow a more stringent tradition of not eating matzah 30 days before. After Purim, we don't eat matzah. I don't eat matzah most of the time anyway. I eat my fake matzahs, and that I can eat. Some don't eat matzah from Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Some just don't eat it the week of. So there'll be something special at the Seder. Next week, we're going to go over the Haggadah and the whole Seder, but I'm going to talk about some of the laws and things around it tonight, and we'll conclude with that. Passover begins like any Yontiv, except we can't start the Seder until nightfall, because the understanding is it goes back to the original idea of the Passover sacrifice. The Passover sacrifice could only be eaten on Pesach itself. You can't begin it early, so we don't start the Seders early. That's a big problem during daylight savings time and when you're in northern part of the world, because it gets late. And again, you talk to your rabbi about issues with that. That often becomes a problem with families and little kids and all of that. So, and in this year it's Friday night, so it has the first Seder is Saturday night. That has other issues, but we won't go into it right now. So normally you start, ideally you start the Seder around an hour after candlelighting time. The tradition is we have to have enough wine so that everyone can have 4 cups of wine during the course of the Seder. You're supposed to drink at least half of about a 3 to 4 ounce cup. If you can't drink wine, you can use grape juice. You can also use low alcohol wine. There are some wines that are like only 4% alcohol. I like dry wine, and you just can't drink cups like that at the Seder. You can drink a lot of wine if you want slowly, but to gulp it down like that is terrible. So maybe my first 2 cups will be a nice Cabernet Sauvignon, but the rest of it will be either some low alcohol wine because it's easier to drink. We have 3 matzot on the table. There are different explanations for it. Traditionally, they say it represents the 3-part division of Israel: Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. It's also because we're going to break the middle matzah. I'll go in detail on that next week. And everyone is supposed to eat of the matzah, we call it kazayit, an olive's worth. And there are different definitions of what that is. Some people go very crazy on it. Again, you can talk to your rabbi what they say you should eat. So what happens is we start the Seder. We start with Kiddush like we do every other time. But instead of going straight to the meal, we have the Seder, the service. Seder means order. The whole night has an order to it. So say we have 4 cups of wine. We're going to use the first cup of wine for the Kiddush. We're going to use the second cup of wine as we recite the story of the Seder. And Hallel, we have a 3rd cup of wine after we eat dinner for the Birkat HaMazon, and then the last cup of wine, the recitation of the Hallel after the meal. Ashkenazic tradition is each time we have the wine, we'll say a bracha, the Brei Pri Hagafen. The meal is supposed to be the meal of freedom. The bread is the bread of freedom. And so the ideal is that we're supposed to see ourselves as if we are slaves in Egypt on our way out of Egypt, as if it's a real thing tonight. Tonight is when we're going out of Egypt. And in the ancient world, how did people eat? They reclined. You know, they had couches or they did it on the floor. And you'd lean over on your couch and you have the lady behind you waving the fan, keeping you cool, right? In all the movies. And you would consume your food. So the tradition was that you recline to the left. When you eat, drink the wine, anytime you drink the wine, anytime you eat the matzah, the greens that we have at the beginning of the meal, but not the bitter herbs that we will talk about. You don't have to recline the whole time. Some people do. Some do the whole time. So we will, like I said, we're going to go all over the Seder later on, but we tell the story, we sing some songs, we have a festive meal. Ideally, before celestial midnight, we have to have eaten the afikomen. 1 piece of matzah is left over for the afikomen to represent the Passover sacrifice, because the last thing you are supposed to eat at the Passover Seder is the Paschal lamb. We don't do that today. We don't have a Passover lamb. So we have a representation of that through the matzah. And in the night with a lot of singing. First 2 days of Passover and the last 2 days of Passover are treated just like any other Yom Tov, right? We're allowed to cook as we're allowed to cook on Yom Tov for cooking purposes, but we're not supposed to work. We're not, otherwise we follow same kinds of laws as we do for Shabbat observance, okay? Except those things that are necessary for making food, producing our food. The Shabbat morning service is like any other holiday service. We have, it's an extended service. We have the special Torah readings each day. We have a special Haftarah. We commemorate 2 nights of the Seder because we live outside the land of Israel, going back to the whole original calendar issue. So that is part and parcel of our observance of the holiday. During the course of the week and on Shabbat later on, if you want to have bread, you have to eat matzah. So if it's Friday night, you need to have 2 loaves of bread for the Shabbat table, you have to have 2 whole matzot. Now, then, but it's instead of regular bread, of leavened bread. At the Seder, it's a special mitzvah. So when we eat the matzah, when we first eat the matzah in the middle of the Seder, we not only say the hamotzi lechem min haaretz, the blessing for bread, we also say a blessing for the mitzvah of eating matzah. But any other time during Passover, I'm not eating matzah to perform the mitzvah of eating matzah. I'm eating matzah because I want to eat something. Then we don't say that extra blessing. It's only said the 2 nights of the Seder. There are some who do, but generally speaking, the law is understood. You only say the bracha al achilat matzah, for the eating of matzah, at the 2 Seders. One special quality about Passover, the first day of Passover, at least biblically, right, was the Passover. That was the day Israel left Egypt. The last day of Passover, the 7th day of Passover, according to the biblical chronology, was the day of the crossing of the sea. And so we recite the passage in the Torah in Exodus that talks about the crossing of the sea, the Shirat Hayam. Now, interestingly enough, there's a wonderful midrash. This midrash says that when Israel was singing, thanking God for saving them, the angels on high also wanted to sing. And God said, you can't sing. My children are drowning in the sea. You may not sing. First of all, it's a powerful thing. Even if they were our enemies, the Egyptian enemies, and even though human beings, we have joy when we have a victory, we should not forget that those are human beings that we may have had to overcome. Now, on the basis of that midrash, one of the important rabbis of the last century, the Chafetz Chaim, says that's why we don't say the full Hallel on the end of Passover. Normally, we have what is called the Hallel. On Rosh Chodesh, we skip part of it. So on the last day of Passover, we skip part of it as well. And since we don't want the intermediate days to seem like they're more important than the last day of Passover, we also omit some of the Hallel during the course of the week as well. Now, there may be other more historical reasons for why we say that, what they call Hallel B'dilug, or the half Hallel, but it's a beautiful explanation for it, and I love it. And it comes from a very important Orthodox authority, so he's not some kind of modern liberal who is, suspect of having to be universalistic in their approach. I remember telling somebody, I said, well, this is a Chafetz Chaim, guys. This is not some liberal reform rabbi. Okay. Also, at Passover time is the tradition to recite, if there's an intermediate Shabbat, or on the last Shabbat of last day of Passover, if it falls in Shabbat, Shir HaShirim, the Song of Solomon. It's springtime. It's a song of spring. Springtime, people's turn to love, beautiful things. And therefore, the tradition is to recite Shir HaShirim on Passover. Okay. And then once Passover is over, you go back to your chametz and all of that, what have you. Okay, so next week, hopefully you have a Haggadah of your own. I may send you some materials that I've got together, but we will go. Well, hopefully, it's the Haggadah you're going to use. There are many, many Haggadot. I've got a couple of bookshelves of various Haggadot. Most of those commentaries, different commentaries and different understandings, and there's some beautiful things we found there. And we're going to talk about the Seder and how I think you really should run the Seder. We'll see. I hope everybody has a Seder they can go to. I hope people can have Seders. Last year it was my wife, my daughter, and myself. Believe me, that's not a way to have a Seder. But we do what we do. Okay, so God willing, I will see everyone next week. And we will work on the Haggadah. Then we'll probably do some Hebrew from the Haggadah rather than the other Hebrew. Okay? Any questions on anything we talked about tonight? No? Everybody had just rattles and rolls. Okay. I will then say good night to everybody. Have a good Shabbos. Have a Freil Purim. If you're going to get drunk, make sure you don't drive.